Why do you think that we're the only intelligent life in the universe?
Yeah, it's a minority view, first of all. So most of my colleagues disagree with me on that. My basic reasoning is this: first of all, just because we're here doesn't mean that that's what happens on a typical planet, right? No matter how rare life is, we're going to find ourselves on a planet with life. So when we look more carefully at the origins of our universe, we run into a lot of things we don't understand. And as you know better than most people, when we look at the very origins of life, there are a lot of things we really have no clue whether they were very likely or very unlikely. My DNA is copied with a ribosome, which is produced using DNA in turn. Is there some way that can evolve through a lot of very likely steps, or do you need a wild stroke of luck? We really don't know. And there are many totally uncertain factors like this. So when we ask, what's the probability that intelligent life like you guys will evolve on a typical planet? The probability P is a product of a whole bunch of numbers that we have no clue about. There could be some of them which could be super small. What we usually do in physics is we say, okay, let's say that we have a uniform probability distribution for that probability, for what the log of that probability is. It's equally likely as 10 to the minus 1, 10 to the minus 2, 10 to the minus 10, 10 to the minus 100, uniform logarithmic prior. If that's what you say, and then you work out how far are we from the nearest other planet that's as advanced as us, surprise, surprise, uniform logarithmic prior. Equally likely that it's 10 to the 20 meters, 10 to the 21 meters, 10 to the 22 meters, etc. So this huge log scale. And then we can say, okay, what do we know about actual data? Well, it seems pretty clear that there's nobody with telescopes anywhere else in our solar system. In fact, we haven't found any evidence of life yet in our galaxy. As Enrico Fermi pointed out, and we know better now, there are loads of other very habitable planets in our galaxy which formed billions of years before us. So if there were life there that evolved, they could have turned us into a parking lot by now if they wanted to. So my guess is that there's actually nothing like us anywhere in our galaxy. On this log scale, there is very little left between our galaxy, 10 to the 21, 10 to the 22 meters, and the 10 to the 26 meters. It's just 4 orders of magnitude out of many, many, many orders of magnitude. So it's much more likely, I think, that if there is life somewhere else, it's vastly farther away than the boundaries even of our universe. And so what that basically tells me is, we don't know for sure, but if there's a significant risk that if we blow it, life as a whole has blown it, that means we should really, really be careful and grateful for what we have, and not think of us as just some insignificant little civilization among so many others, and if we blow it, that's okay, because the Andromedans are going to make it all be okay. No, you guys need to all go out and make a difference.
Thank you for that great perspective. And Ard, in that discussion Max just gave, he was alluding to the statistical thinking of Reverend Bayes. There are also theological views on this. How would you respond to that argument?
So I'll say my ignorance. I know that theologians for quite a long history have thought about the question of other planets, and some of them have said that would be very possible, and perhaps interesting. Perhaps God could have made life on different planets. The writer C.S. Lewis from Oxford famously wrote a very interesting science fiction thing on different planets with different kinds of life on them. I think that by and large, Christianity is somewhat neutral on this idea of other planets. I don't think it really has a strong stake.
In this century.
Yeah, you mentioned stake, and Giordano Bruno ended up on one
that's right,
in the year 1600, exactly for saying that he thought there was life on other planets. But in fairness to the Catholic Church, they have mellowed a lot, and
they have mellowed. That's true. No, so I think the Church has done sometimes silly things, and usually, if you look into more detail at what was going on in Galileo or Bruno, these were also linked to other political arguments at the time, right? So,
indeed.
So I'm afraid that's not a very satisfactory answer to your question.
What's your personal answer to it?
My personal answer is, so I kind of asked, on the one hand, I kind of hope that we find life on another planet, because that would be just really cool. Also, because I'm very interested. I am very interested, like Max said, in what is the probability that something like life that we could have an origin of life. And the only way I'm very interested in what's called convergent evolution. So the idea that if you evolve again, will you get something similar to what we have today? Or if you were evolving, would you get something very different? And we only have an N of one, which is us, and so it's hard to know. And so I'm scientifically very fascinated by the idea that there might be life somewhere else. But then I do think as a Christian, it make me think, what does that mean? Would Jesus have to die again for this other planet? I think it would raise, I think it's fair to say that it would raise some pretty serious theological thoughts. I just kind of think, wouldn't it be cool, right?
Yeah.
So that's not a very sophisticated answer, but I say it would be cool.
I confess I have a strong emotional hope there also, which is, on one hand, of course, I think life is fantastically cool, and so instinctively it would be nice to find more of it, even on Jupiter's moon, Europa, or so on. But actually now I'm very much crossing my fingers that all of these NASA missions will find nothing there. And the reason is because I'm very optimistic. Whenever I watch the news, I get pessimistic. Then whenever I go to class and teach you awesome people, I get optimistic about the future again. And I really hope that
You hope that people will turn off their TV sets.
Well, and also the fact that we haven't been visited by any aliens yet, presumably, it means that life is pretty rare. Maybe I'm an alien. Actually, my wife is an alien, actually. A temporary, permanent resident, actually. But yeah, maybe life is rare. Okay, so if we know that life is rare, that means there's some kind of roadblock along the way that's very unlikely, and to the kind of life that could come and colonize us from elsewhere. There's some kind of roadblock between no life at all and then evolving all the way up to life that can colonize our universe. Where is the roadblock? Either it's behind us or it's in front of us. If we end up finding life on Mars that's evolved independently of us, which uses something other than DNA, and life on Europa, again, did it a third way, that suggests that actually getting life started is easy. And it makes me really worried that the roadblock is in front of us and that we're doomed, that we will ultimately ourselves, in our attempts to make the most of life, run into that roadblock. If it turns out that life is really, really rare, then it's more likely that the roadblock is in your department and the sort of stuff you pioneer in your lab, and something in the very early stages of life to do with a ribosome or whatnot. And that means we've already passed the roadblock, and the road is clear ahead of us, and we're only limited by our imagination. That's what I'm hoping for, and that's why I'm hoping we won't find life on Mars.
What wonderful. Art, something you said really struck me. You said that you're not sure about some of the questions, for example, whether life could have emerged elsewhere. And if it did, it might confront you with theological conundrums. What would it take? Would it be possible that some discovery would actually profoundly change your worldview?
Yes. So a simple example would be if we could find the skeleton of Jesus Christ. That would profoundly affect my worldview because I believe that Christ rose again. So if we could find in some kind of, it's hard to imagine how you would find, but let's say we would find unequivocal evidence that he died and he did not rise, that would definitely change my worldview. And I think it's important that I don't have some kind of unfalsifiable worldview. And so that's definitely something that would falsify it.
And if that happened, you wouldn't become a Jew or a Muslim, for example?
Well, okay. So I actually think that's a good question. So I think that looking at the way the world is, just the question of why is there something rather than nothing, looking at the beauty of the world very strongly suggests to me that unbalanced evidence points towards some kind of theism. I didn't give my argument, but I believe that is that's as I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. So if it turns out that Jesus Christ was in fact didn't rise from the dead and I was wrong, then I would go back and say, okay, I still think these arguments about there being a God behind the world make it very likely, and I'd have to go around and see if I could find it somewhere else. So I don't say if I don't know what I would do. I'd look around, I would try my best. If you think about how would a God relate to us, it's very likely that is going to have some kind of personal element. There are all kinds of things that I think are likely to be there, so I would look for something like that. It would be the saddest thing I could possibly imagine, but it's important that we're open to these kinds of possibilities. Right?
I appreciate your honesty. Thank you. Max, the same question for you. Is there anything that could profoundly change your worldview about religion?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, my great physics hero is Richard Feynman.
We're rubbing it in.
Once said that to him, the single most important principle of science is that you should not trust authority. And I take that to mean that we shouldn't trust any authority, including ourselves and our own prejudices. We should question everything. In fact, I find it fascinating. I'm very interested in the history of science. How many of the great discoveries were missed just because the scientist had that one preconception that he or she just wouldn't challenge. Even Einstein dropped the ball on discovering the expanding universe because he had a preconception. And so sometimes I joke that my religion is Bayesianism. And, and that means that I have to update my prior every time I get new information. If I get really, really strong evidence for something that goes against what I used to believe, then I'll change my mind. Yeah.
Well, there are no limits when you can keep shifting based on new discoveries. So. But it's important, what you're saying is that science is not all theoretical. We have to look to the empirical. And I'm hearing the same from you, Ard, that you would take experimental proof or disproof for religious views as being possible.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a remarkable conclusion from two theoretical physicists.